And I posed the question earlier today, is there anybody in Southern California that Dina Lazovsky doesn't know? She seems to know everybody, and everybody loves Dina because she's amazing. So to know her is to love her and admire her. She is currently the Senior Director of Business Development for Physical Sciences and Engineering at UCLA's Technology Development Group. She joined UCLA recently in August 2019 after leaving Biocom, which was very sad for many of us that got to interact with her so regularly. But the good news is she says she's going to be coming to more meetings now, so we're going to get to see Dina more often. More recently, just before that, she was the executive director at Biocom, leading Biocom's efforts to grow and support the LA life science industry. Welcome, Dina. Thank you.
I have the privilege and honor to be moderating 4 conversations with amazing CEOs that are working sort of at this convergence of life science and tech, which AI is such a great example of. And as most of you know, because Brad says that I know everybody, so you must have heard me say this already, one of the strengths of the LA region is where life science and physical sciences meet. And AI is just such a great example of that. I think there's been some rumblings in the news about, is there a bubble? Is AI just bells and whistles? And one of the things that I love about having been asked to do this here with these companies is that you'll be able to see that AI is a wonderful tool. When it's used as a proper tool, as something that's doing deep things for patients, for doctors, there's a lot that we can do with it. Someone might be doing kind of just bells and whistles, but that's not what these companies are doing. And so I'm really excited about introducing them to you, and we'll see where that goes. So my first speaker is Alireza Shabani, CEO of QLab. If you could come up, Alireza. They'll turn it on for you. I magically started being hearable also. So Alireza, thank you for joining us. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, and congratulations for organizing this very interesting event.
I had nothing to do with that part.
Okay. You were very critical. So yeah, my name is Alireza Shabani. I'm a CEO and founder of a company, QLab. We are a startup based in Los Angeles, Westwood area. And we are applying AI and computational technology like quantum computing to automate design of small molecule drugs. So we are kind of drug discovery company.
So help the audience understand how you might be applying AI to drug discovery.
Sure. This idea applying AI to drug discovery is, or just talking about drug discovery, is a long process. It starts from patients that you diagnose certain diseases, and then you need to decide what's the mechanism of that disease, and then we are talking about the biology. And when you figure out what's the mechanism of disease, then you start thinking about how you want to treat that. And that becomes drug discovery. So for us, when you talk about drug discovery, basically we design the right molecule. That molecule will be somehow injected into the body or consumed, and that will target that particular diseases. For example, is a cancer in the cell. So we are at the very end of like directly applying AI to automate or find what's the right molecule or drug for particular diseases.
And how is this better than the traditional way of doing drug discovery?
Traditional way is a very trial and error in the lab. That has caused, the cost of drug discovery in current pharma industry is very high. On average, it costs in the U.S. $2 to $3 billion to start a project and take a drug to the market. So if you see very huge astronomical cost of treatment, is because of or partially because of the cost of discovery and development is very high. So with AI, we want to do AI and general computing technology. We want to reduce this cost by first designing this on the computer before taking it to the lab. And yeah, that's the mission that we are pursuing.
So where are you in that process? Have you tested it out yet?
Well, actually, we're the first disease we were working on is some autoimmune disease that, yeah, we're just doing the first test of our system.
And do you envision that your discovery process and getting a drug to market will look similar to the traditional way of doing that? How do you envision this working?
At this stage, a part of drug discovery, I mean, the process would be the same because that's the regulation by FDA. You need to first, whatever drug that you design in any way, either AI or traditional, you need to first test on animals. It's called preclinical test, and the different stages on clinical and human. So that part is kind of regulations. Mm-hmm. But we expect, as we show that the power of our technologies, or all the different labs or companies who develop this computational methods, if we can prove it's really game changer, that we expect like working directly with FDA, then they change to make this process much shorter.
So shortening the process presumably would lower the cost.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Maybe I just tell you about the recent story was published last month. It was a case of a girl patient is 6 years old. I think she was suffering from some neurodegenerative diseases. She had seizures like very frequently during the day. And in a very particular arrangement, she was admitted to or was working with the Boston Children's Hospital. And from the day that they started doing some genetic discovery and what's the cause of these diseases, to the time they specifically designed a particular molecule for that patient, got FDA approval, everything, and then they did a test on her. It was a period of 9 months. So in principle, it's possible that really you do taking this drug discovery process as on average like a 10 years process. You can do the whole thing in 9 months. If you show that really you can quickly design the compounds, you can quickly test that. In that case, had been the very urgency, so FDA quickly approved, make like a 1 year period of preclinical test to shorten it just to 1 month. And that's the case, really, the technology can change also, inform the regulators that they change it, and hopefully it will solve this crisis that we're observing in the pharma industry.
That's fantastic. And so clearly shortening the process lowers the prices. Obviously, we're all concerned about drug pricing these days. What about the outcomes? Do you think the actual outcomes will be improved as well, or do you see it sort of coming out with the same sort of stuff?
You mean the outcome,
for the patients? Sorry, yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely that's the main goal. Yes, the goal is that there are lots of the heart diseases that are unsolved. Like cancer is one good example of that. We need to do lots of research there to learn what's the mechanism of cancer, and that's where one area that AI is really let us to do quick measurements and making the sense of data. So, yeah, that's the main goal. And those,
Good.
I mean, reducing the price is like a secondary consequence of that.
Got it. And if you're willing to tell us, I'm sorry, I didn't ask him this in advance. Could you tell us about the development of the technology? Did you develop it in the company or with partners?
Well, everything we do it in-house. So we are a
Great.
team of, we're a team of chemists, physicists, computer scientists. So we're developing this technology, and then at this stage we do our tests with some research organization, CROs, to do the early test for us as a proof of concept. But yeah, it's in-house development.
So multidisciplinary team based in Los Angeles. This is what we want to showcase today. So awesome. At this point, I'd like to sort of turn it over to the audience if any of you have questions for Alireza. I see some in the back there. And if you could tell us who you are and then ask the question.
My name is Wan Yan. I am actually been in the industry for a while. I did I started my career as a research scientist and then all the way to business development and investment. So I have seen a lot of, by the way, Kamala is like very good technology they just described. I've seen a lot of AI, how to apply AI to solve healthcare problems. Can you also like elaborate a little bit more on how does your technology differentiate from your competitors out there? And you also mentioned that you would like to use it for like a cancer treatment. We all know that like cancer is just not one disease. It's like maybe like a thousands, every type of cancer different. So do you have any idea like which one will you want to focus first?
Sure. What we do, our technology has two areas, applying AI to automate chemistry, molecule design. So we do molecule design. That's the one paradigm shift we are pushing for. Right now, we are talking about drug discovery. So it's a very kind of serendipity. You keep searching about, find that set of molecules. So we want to turn that discovery into actual design. So design, our platform, we tell, okay, design this molecule with the property A, B, C, D. So that's the one part of technology. The other part that differentiates us, we have a competitive technologies, are simulation. So when you want to do drug discovery, you have to simulate part of the biology that's like proteins or whatever is involved into that diseases. So that simulation need to be accurate, and that's one area we are working on, including in the near future, leveraging on quantum computers to better simulate proteins. And on the second part of your questions, no, we have a general purpose. Our platform is general purpose. So I gave a cancer as an example, but our target is what's called undruggable, or the disease that we're looking at is called undruggable targets. So it's a large set of diseases. We know the mechanism. We have not been able to manually to find the right drug or molecule for that. So that's our focus, basically.
Another question up here?
So the case study you gave with the young lady in Boston represented an extremely accelerated process, not only for the drug development and discovery, but for FDA approval. And was that just for that one case? And how likely do you think it will be for future developments for your business to go through that same accelerated pace of FDA approval?
Sure. I mean, the report that I read was the researcher at the hospital directly at work with FDA because it has been a case of emergency. The condition of the girl had been become worse over the weeks, and then they start. If I remember the numbers right, they first say you should test on animal for 3 months for toxicity and say, oh, it's urgent. They reduced it to 1 month. So that has been very good a case of you directly work with regulators. And so ultimately the goal is that to have a full pipeline of going from the patient, doing diagnostic, and then suggesting the right treatment. It should be very efficient pipeline of discovery. And as soon as you show you have something is working, it shouldn't be hard to show it to regulator to change that. And
Over here, I'm sorry, the two of you might have to duke it out about who gets to answer the question.
How do you choose the targets that you'd like to focus on? What's your selection criteria?
Again, so we have a class of known what's called undruggable, some of them are drugs. So that's one area we are looking at. But because that's really we can show our platform is differentiable. And besides that, we are working with some institute. They find new targets, and to give a technical discussion, but there is no crystal information. Then we do some homology modeling on that, and so it's our platform in principle is a general purpose.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of times the problem isn't so much that we don't have a good target, but that you do have a good target and it does a lot of other things. So you're growing 2 arms and 2 legs, but you're also killing the cancer. So how do you rule those other side effects out?
I mean, that's maybe polypharmacology, that's the area that you're looking at, or you have many off-targets. So that's the case, we can easily computationally handle that. As long as we know what are multi-targets are important in that specific mechanism, or what is the off-targets, then that can be computationally modeled.
So we have time for one more question, and I'd like to give someone in the back of the room a chance, since I've been picking, if there is one towards the back of the room. All right, if not, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dana. My question is, through your AI research, can you correlate your AI findings with cancer to imaging, radiology? Because a lot of times when a person comes off chemo, they get imaged to see whether the cancer is completely cured, and cancer has a habit of coming back. Maybe if you know that which cancers have a propensity to come back and are not completely detected, you can correlate with that the imaging so that it's 100%.
So we don't do that. So that area is more on the biology side. We're under more like a drug design, hopefully in the future. But that's the area, back to the previous question also, that's the area if you can collect, if you have lots of data on different areas, either you can start from the imaging that you have, and then if you have any data on the like a cell activity or something, is if there's enough clean data, then you can use AI to make a correlation between them. Yet we are not doing that area.
So Ali Reza, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like the audience to know about what you do?
I think maybe give you my background. I was working at Google in the Venice office, and I left Google and decided to build this company in Los Angeles because I believe in the potential of this city to grow, especially in the area of water is a science and tech. There are lots of good schools, and hopefully, I mean, we're seeing new tech companies coming. This kind of events really will help to grow this ecosystem.
Thank you again.
Sure. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Wout Bruselaars, the CEO of Deep6 AI. Wout, if you'd like to come join me. Ooh, background music. You got the walk-on music. Thank you. So, Wout, let's start with a little bit of background about you and your company, please.
Sure. So my name is Wout. I'm the founder and CEO of Deep6 AI. As our name vaguely suggests, we're working in artificial intelligence. And what we do, we use actually different types of AI to help accelerate patients matching to clinical trials. Why do we do that? Because everybody here in the audience is probably working in some type of drug or device discovery. One of the bigger problems once you're actually done or halfway through the discovery is how do you bring this to market? How do you test this? How do you make sure that you can actually convince the regulators and the public that what you have spent so many years developing actually is safe and that it works? And that's where you have the whole clinical trials process. And to our surprise, when we started venturing into healthcare, that whole gatekeeping position has become much of a bottleneck for many of us. So we decided it's a prime use case for AI to help you basically find very qualified or eligible patients with your study criteria and help accelerate that whole process from trial design to site selection, patient recruitment, on study management, and hopefully post-study actually follow-up.
I think you have a video. Did you want us to show that now?
You know what? If you don't mind sticking with somebody with an accent as your second speaker, maybe we can just continue like this because I feel maybe
perfect.
disruptive.
I'm happy to do that. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about your personal background as well?
Yes, my background is, if we want to be charitable to me, eclectic. My mom thought I would never get a job because I started in philosophy and mathematics, then studied economics. I became a diplomat in the Middle East first, joined McKinsey & Company in Southeast Asia, started an extreme sports company. Then I went into physical security across the world, Africa, Latin America, Asia, etc. And then I started this company. So exactly. If you find it in your pattern, then you outperformed any AI that I could work on.
We like eclectic backgrounds in Los Angeles.
Good, good.
So tell me a little bit about how your company is using AI, how it's disruptive and helping you.
Absolutely. So what we really use AI on is to make sense on all of the unstructured and structured data in patient records. And what kind of ignited or inspired our journey is years ago we were reading about this massive investment in electronic medical records, right? The US was spending $70 billion on digitizing all of these records. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. You're going to create massive amounts of big data in healthcare. You can basically compare patients to each other. You have this collective medical intelligence. This is going to leapfrog all the knowledge that we have today and allow all of this benchmarking. Unfortunately, as you dig a little bit deeper, at the end of that expensive journey, what we ended up with was really massive amounts of locked and fragmented data in each of these individual records, and very little of that collectivization and that benchmarking of data. And apart from political reasons, perhaps that I cannot really talk much about, one of the foundational problems that we have there, I believe, is that much of the salient data that makes it into a patient's record is unstructured. It is actually the notes, right? It's the interaction you have with your physician, with your caregivers, where they don't have time to chase down labeled fields in an EMR, which is highly cumbersome. They're just like typing things out as they go because they want to maintain that contact with you as a patient. And that's where the wealth of the information is. Unfortunately, traditional software doesn't really know how to make sense of that. If it sees like long sentences, it doesn't really know whether the word Lincoln in there is like, oh, is that a car brand? Is that an ex-president? Is that an address? What is this really referring to? So we're really using NLP and AI to make sense of that, and ideally to start taking all of that structured and unstructured data that has a lot of hypotheticals, a lot of negated concepts, lots of signal and noise, reduce it to a signal that really can point to specific events in a patient timeline that are relevant and allow you to say, well, this patient matches that patient, or this patient would be a great candidate for this trial.
And so how is that helping the patients themselves?
Well, as you may know, with the advent of precision medicine and the accelerated development of all these new drugs that are targeting very specific areas, we now have actually for the first time, I think, ever, almost an overabundance of potential treatments and drugs, many of them being in development. It's really hard to match those with patients as many of these drugs have not been fully approved yet. In many cases, putting a patient onto a drug that is in a phase 3 study or something, or even earlier, can be a life-saving event for them.
So is there a crossover between this and the efforts in precision medicine?
Absolutely. I mean, the reason why it's so important today to do this and do this precision matching for clinical trials is because you no longer are trying to fill trials with just any patient, right? The more precise the drug is that you're trying to develop, the more precise the cohort selection has to be for the patients you want to test it on. If you select the wrong patients in your study, right, in your cohort, the efficacy or the outcomes of the patient you're going to collect is not going to be optimal. As a result, you may not actually get approval by the FDA. So this is a make or break moment.
And thank you for explaining that. And I also, we talked about this before, there are lots of concerns about not enough clinical trials, including a properly diverse patient population. It sounds to me like your services would help that.
Absolutely. It's a topic that's close to our heart, right? I mean, in a way, we have the luxury of living in a very diverse city like Los Angeles, which is great. We have lots of activity here. We have some prime healthcare systems here. But what is happening still, and to some extent sadly, is, right, if you take a patient who's going to, say, a community hospital somewhere, and that patient gets a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, if there's no clinical trial, if there's no further follow-up, that patient is limited to the care options that are available right now. If you have the same patient or a different patient but with a similar diagnosis and you go to an epic medical center where there's lots of research, that same patient can be put on a clinical trial that could basically save the life or extend the life significantly. So there's a big difference. I call it like a tale of two different health systems. And I do believe that by having big data, you're to some extent solving the denominator problem, right? You're having all of these patients together. Where AI can come in, it can actually identify the numerator. It can say, well, this patient here is a great match for this trial. Specific to this patient, again, precision medicine, precision matching, I can put this patient on a study, which may have a greater impact than competing caregiving options.
Amazing. And so there's the patient outcomes part, which I think is fantastic. It sounds like this could also save us money as a system and a country.
Absolutely. I mean, as a startup founder, I mean, you guys all know this, right? You think like you're shooting for the moon, you think everything. There's some hubris involved because you think we can solve so many problems. But the thing is, I mean, you're trying to find a problem that you can hold in your hand. And like finding patients for trials, matching patients for trials is something very specific on an almost operational level. But if you think about all the effects further down, if you can find more patients for trials faster, significantly save the time, right? You can actually accelerate healthcare innovation as a whole. And what that allows you to do is accelerate and help accelerate drug development like Ali was talking about as well, right? And hopefully that will have an effect on the cost of drug development. First of all, you will actually save failed trials, which are very expensive and cost time and effort. And all of that written off money can actually be recovered much faster. The same time actually become more effective, and you can actually have a faster cycle. If you can add a year to any of your developments, right, under patent on the market, if you can save off a year from clinical trials because you're just faster in development, that's an additional year that you can actually sell your drug at a premium before prices drop after generics come in. What we also hope to do eventually, going a little bit further here, is partner with payers and tell payers, like, you know what, these patients that you have on your plan could benefit from a study. If you put those patients on a study, right, the sponsor can share in some of the costs. It can also reduce the cost of the plan for the patient.
Oh, wow.
So lots of opportunities for all of these things to have like a macroeconomic effect.
Fantastic. So I've asked you lots of questions. Let's give the audience a chance to do that now. Questions? I see one in the back there.
Hello. Yeah, I definitely admire what you're doing, and I think it's amazing that you're helping out with the clinical trials. In light of like the recent Google article about sharing of patient information without them knowing, how do you deal with that issue?
Well, first of all, we stopped using Russian hackers to get access to the data. Thank you. I appreciate the reconnaissance there. No, I mean, it's a very important thing, and from the start, we developed a model that allows us not to own any data. We work with sites and with provider systems that want to put patients on studies that they're conducting, right, for partners. And we give them a self-service tool that sits on top of their data behind their firewall, right, in their cloud environment or whatever, and it's a self-service tool. We monitor it for quality, etc. We allow companies running studies to basically build queries that they can share with the health system, so they can actually find studies and patients for their study, etc., help with trial design, but we're only kind of an intermediary. We don't own the data, we don't try to pull it away, so there's a very strong Chinese wall between both.
So is that an on-prem platform that you guys embed into?
We started with on-prem and in the cloud. The problem that you have with on-prem, right, is that it's not very scalable. You don't have the elasticity to match the performance. If you're looking through hundreds of millions of records, all in real time, to quickly show matches and show like a funnel count in real time, right, there's very few on-prem systems that will allow you to support that. So what we typically do is a single instance private cloud for each of the systems that they own.
Thanks so much.
Other questions? Yes. Sorry, just wait one moment for the mic, please.
Sure. Thank you. What intellectual property have you developed, and how are you protecting it? And who's your competition?
All good questions. The IP that we've developed is actually in two broad components of the tool, right? One is actually making or finding signal in the noise of the data, so the way that we go through all of these electronic medical records and that we find data in there and how we model that. So we're using a combination of NLP, different types of supervised and unsupervised learning, and graph databases and graph application systems. So when we take patients' data in, we go through all the records, we find all the relevant clinical concepts, right? And we represent that patient as a graph. So as a multidimensional object that can have hundreds of thousands of different clinical features, but it also allows us to kind of track the edges or the relationship between those features. That allows us eventually to build like a higher order knowledge and information. So like if you're looking for patients with X, but X is not diagnosed or is not mentioned in the record of the patient, we know that X is highly correlating with these three other concepts that have thick edges into the graph of other patients like this, and we can make inferences. So all of that development, that's part of the IP. Another thing, which is not as pure AI, etc., which kind of surprises, is honestly the ability to do this at scale. Being able to run at multiple health systems with hundreds of millions of records in real time and joining those together kind of and coming with results, that was a pretty heavy lift, and we're pretty proud of the performance that we have there. In terms of competition, it kind of depends. What we see the most is some kind of a homegrown tool that some health systems have built to help their local researchers find patients. But it's kind of an order of magnitude different in terms of results. And what we often say, like, if your job, right, I mean, if you buy, say, cabinets from IKEA, and it's the one cabinet you buy, you will put it together with a Swiss Army knife. You'll cut yourself, you'll swear, you'll hit your thumb or something, whatever, but after an hour or something, you'll have kind of a cabinet up. If your job is to build 600 of those cabinets in a week, week after week, you want to use a power tool, and we're that power tool. So that's kind of how I feel like we compare with some of the homegrown tools. It's software, so I should probably be smarter about the whole patent connection there, etc. We think it's software. Our, I'd say, IP lies in the speed at which we can execute, and that we keep on building new features and making the product better and better.
That was a fantastic analogy, by the way. I could immediately see what you were trying to say. Anyway, other questions back here?
Hi, Chris Miller. Just curious, how scalable do you think this is to other languages, other regions, other health systems?
It's a great question, and it's I wouldn't call it a solved problem. We put the foundations in place to solve it. So when we recognize clinical concepts in the data, right, we assign it an index number, so it's language independent. So we know, for instance, say prostate cancer, right, in a text in English has this, but it's a joint index. If we would find the same thing in Chinese or something, or in French or something else, we would still use the same index, so we can map it fairly easily. That should help us with the localization. We started some very, very early looking into that, but right now, we're mostly focused on English-speaking countries first to grow to scale, and then we'll think about how we localize that.
That's a great question. One last question.
Well, got the last question. So for trial matching, do you just looking for information from EMR, EHR, or do you also leverage the genomic data? Because a lot of pharmaceutical companies, they're already using companion diagnostics to match the right patient to the drug. So how do you include the genomic and molecular data into your AI equation?
Absolutely. Thanks. That's a great question, because it allows us to point out something where I believe we shine. So I didn't pay her, by the way. This is a true question. We do indeed look at more than just the EMR data. What we try to do, and that's one of the benefits of having a patient as a graph, we can basically include any type of clinical data. So typically we go into what we call an electronic data warehouse at the site, and we pull data from all the systems, including genomics, including biomics, including anything that is clinically relevant. What we have done now, actually, based on user feedback, is we have a way of collapsing all of that data into that one graph and going through it. Some genomics data, though, can be very precise, like, are you talking about this snippet with this genetic mutation? Is it a deletion? Is it an alteration, etc.? And often that is kind of skipped in the unstructured data in the notes, and it's very specifically labeled in some specific notes, like for Caris, a foundation, a Tempus, etc. So we've built an additional UI to interact with that in a very granular level. So you can kind of say, this is a snippet with this mutation, with an alteration. Is it somatic? Is it wild type, germline, etc.? So it's kind of an ongoing thing, but we're pretty proud of that. It's pretty high performance.
And we're out of time for Wout. Sorry about that, but I think he'll be here after if you have more questions.
Absolutely.
Right.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And Leo, thanks everybody. Leo Petrosian, CEO of Neural Analytics. Thanks, Leo. So let's go ahead and start with, tell us about yourself and your company, please.
So Neural Analytics is a medical technology company that's 7 years old, spun out of UCLA Neurosurgery. We are the application of technology towards what we believe to be the largest opportunity area in healthcare, which is brain health. As a financial reference point, we spend about $3.5 trillion a year in healthcare in the United States. Brain health accounts for about $800 billion of spend each year. However, if you had the opportunity or the misfortune of visiting a neurologist, you'll observe that they're expected to manage health for the most complicated part of your body with a reflex hammer, a tuning fork, and a stethoscope. So we basically empower physicians to take better care of people's brains through technology.
So tell us about the technology.
Sure. So everybody in the room is familiar with ultrasound imaging. Ultrasound imaging has been around for 70 years. It's a standard of care in healthcare, very well known, very well understood. It's not very frequently applied to the brain, specifically because the brain is enclosed in the skull. So if you imagine what an ultrasound procedure looks like, what you'll typically see is a machine. A human will be holding a probe, a transducer. They'll bring it in contact with the subject. They'll look around for something interesting. They'll get a picture. That doctor will look at the picture and then say, this looks good, this looks bad. If it looks bad, I see something. So what we make is a headset that actually, instead of the conventional ultrasound, has a special ultrasound that can go through the skull. And instead of a human holding a probe, there's actually two small robots that sit on the side of the subject's head that will find a good view through the skull into the center of the brain, and then the robots will map the inside of the brain. And then that'll go over to another AI that will identify whether or not the brain it's observing is a healthy or an unhealthy brain. And if it's unhealthy, it tells you what's wrong with it, whether the subject's had a stroke, a concussion, or various other neurological conditions.
So is the AI basically being diagnostic? Is that?
So we have two separate AIs in our system. I'm really fond of a framework for AI development called the DIKW framework. We collect data, we analyze or label it, it becomes information, we interpret it, it becomes knowledge, we apply that, that's wisdom. So we have two separate AIs. The first AI runs the robot. An expert ultrasonographer is much better, much faster than a novice is. So the robots are trained in how to do ultrasound through an AI process themselves. The second AI is what looks at the images that are produced and identifies which diseases it perceives, or if the brain is healthy that it's watching.
And so how is this helping patients? How is it disruptive for them?
Yeah, so there's countless ways that it helps patients. I'll say that in a hospital environment, it gives them access to a diagnostic that's quantitative. So we've had a lot of talks about drug development coming into this, and I'll say as an example, one of the biggest drug opportunities unquestionably in the world is dementia or Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And yet, if you look at every single clinical study, they've all failed at phase 3. And I'll argue strongly that it's not because the drugs don't work, it's because the endpoints don't work.
What does that mean?
So in a lot of neurological conditions, we have very, very subjective endpoints. So in the case of migraine, for example, the endpoint is days without migraine per month. Versus a way to look at somebody's brain and say, hey, we're actually making this condition better. In the case of dementia, the cognitive performance is the indicator of a therapeutic outcome, or one of the leading ones, and there's just a huge amount of variance. Coming back around to your original question, our product helps by allowing physicians to see physiologically what's wrong with the brain quantitatively in ways that, as opposed to symptomatically. Mm-hmm. Number two, it allows the assessment of brain health in places where there's no neurologist. So let's just say in an ambulance, in an urgent care, in a nursing home, in a combat zone, places where you don't have experts available. And then, so those are the big ones, where we allow clinical care to be practiced quantitatively and accurately in places where it was never practiced before.
And how does that help? I mean, it sounds intuitively like it does, but being able to be diagnosed in the field, what?
Yeah, so I'll give you a good example. So two very acute conditions that significantly affect every single one of us in our lives that we're all at risk of is heart disease, having a heart attack, and the other one being having a stroke, okay? So in the case of having a heart attack, if somebody had the misfortune of having a heart attack in this room, we have a tool, ignoring all the doctors in the room, which I'm sure there are many of, there's actually a tool somewhere on the wall called an automated defibrillator. The automated defibrillator can be placed on a person's chest, can identify if they've had a heart attack, and can actually intervene in that case and yield a better patient outcome. Mm-hmm. 30 years ago, that technology or capability was confined to the emergency room. Today, through automation and lowering the technical requirements and the skill requirements, it's now accessible to all of us. Conversely, for a condition like stroke, which can strike like lightning, similar to a heart attack, there is today no equivalent. Mm-hmm. If somebody had the misfortune of having a stroke outside and there's no doctor there is no way to diagnose them. There's no way to know that they've had a stroke versus they're having a seizure or something else. So our product is a product that can be used in an environment to identify what went wrong, and most importantly, get them to the hospital or the environment where they can get treated most efficiently. Stroke is our leading use case. There's about 800,000 strokes in the United States each year. It's a $77 billion problem as estimated by the CDC. 250,000 stroke deaths a year, if I remember correctly. We only treat 25,000 strokes. Mm-hmm. And that number is limited primarily by the fact that we can't diagnose strokes fast enough.
So this will help us diagnose them faster, so better patient outcomes, and then presumably lower costs for the health systems as well.
Yeah, stroke is, so this is a terrible statistic to share, but the numbers actually paint a very accurate picture. So we all know about cancer and all the investment in cancer. We talk about cancer, right? Cancer is a $160 billion problem in the United States. Chronic back pain is a $177 billion problem. Okay? And you're like, wait a second, how is cancer less expensive than chronic back pain? And fundamentally what it comes down to is that cancer kills patients. Chronic back pain doesn't. And so neurological conditions are super long tail expenses for the payer. Stroke is globally the #1 cause of disability. Think about a condition like brain injury, and it's for the armed forces as far as healthcare for the armed forces is concerned. Care of veterans who've suffered brain injury is the #1 line item.
Wow.
Okay? So these neurological conditions, from #1 being dementia at $250 million a year US spending, chronic back pain, you have stroke, brain injury, migraine. There's 50 million chronic migraine sufferers in the United States. These are huge long tail expenses for payers.
Got it. At this point, let's turn it to the audience. I'm sure you guys have questions for Leo. Over here, is that person with the microphone? Please pick one of them.
I'm hyper caffeinated, so I might be talking a little faster than normal.
That's all right. That gives us more time for more questions.
My name is Wozgan. Very fascinating work. I really loved it. Just curious how long the imaging takes and how long does the AI processes and diagnosis?
Yeah, great question. So I always think of AI in how we do diagnostics with it as an amplification of the world's best doctor. And by combining the AI on the interpretation side with the robot on the data collection side, we're actually capable of getting a diagnosis much, 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 much faster than anything else out there. So if you were to have a brain ultrasound performed at, let's say, Cedars-Sinai or UCLA, a typical procedure will take 30 minutes and require a subspecialist physician to perform. In our case, our robot, 99 out of 100 times from being placed on the patient's head to being done is under 90 seconds. And it can, not only is it a lot faster, it's more accurate than the average user, and it can be done, for example, in an ambulance while you're driving. So you're not consuming any time from the patient care window. So the AI and the robot going hand in hand really accelerate and improve the quality of outcomes that you can get.
So it doesn't matter that the car is moving around?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so the robot is faster at adapting, so it's got a very sophisticated control system. I was guinea pig #1 in a moving ambulance in LA, and you can hear me in the demo video saying, go faster, go faster. We hit some traffic, and I'm like, no, I want some like high speed, and then they're like, Leo, we're going 75 in the freeway, shut up.
So you're good with fast driving even when you're not behind the wheel?
Yeah, totally. I was like strapped into a gurney having a robot map my brain in LA traffic, and I was like, this is cool.
Fun. So I know the microphone, go ahead, person with the microphone.
Hi,
Yep.
thanks, Leo. So you've got this medical device and you've got this data analytics. At what stage in your product development were you thinking about AI? When did it enter the picture? What was that story?
Good question. So we started the company in 2013 when 3 co-founders met, myself, Robert, and Dan. Robert was a PhD student at UCLA, and he was doing his work on AI and neuroscience. I happened to be in the audience and see him give a presentation, and my wife, coincidentally, is a neurologist. So his AI that he developed was on a way of looking at ultrasound data to make diagnoses. And I went home to my wife and I asked her, and I'm like, if you could have a product in an ambulance or in a hospital or your doctor's office that could do something automatically like this, would you want one? And her answer was, if you could build that, every neurologist on the planet would want one. And so I was like, all right, that's kind of a good piece of feedback.
Good consultants.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The AI came first, and then we didn't add the robot till 2 years later. And the robot got added specifically because we needed a way of deploying the AI. And it's like, we say that the AI is fantastic for the clinical research. We've been fortunate enough to win like 26 million in government grants, all for the AI. But the AI is useless if it requires an expert to be present. And that's where the robot comes in.
I know you've been waiting. Go ahead.
San May, LA County. Question on your diagnostics. Do you, a lot of diseases are correlated. Do you use any disease correlates? And also, like in your technology, what else do you use other than a Doppler? Because the way I understand the Doppler imprints are not that granular. And that's why people do MRIs and things like that. So what else do you do, and what other factors do you consider in your AI to come to a better diagnosis?
Two really good questions. So in most AI development in a diagnostic space, you need to have a gold standard to compare against. For all the diseases that you'll hear me talk about commercialization on, we have a very specific gold standard. Like for stroke, you're doing a CT angiogram, right? And so we were fortunate enough to get a lot of government funding to support all of those clinical studies, head-to-head trials. The company actually began as a concussion diagnostic company. And 7 years in, concussion still remains on the research side, specifically because there's no gold standard to compare against for regulatory. So for all the different diseases, we focus on the ones where there's a definitive gold standard because it accelerates our regulatory process. The second half of your question was about whether we integrate other pieces of data into our schema. We rely on the ultrasound, but what we'll do is that we'll introduce some additional factors into the ultrasound data stream. So for example, everybody, or many of you might know what a echocardiogram is, but a lot of you might not know what a stress echo is. So an echocardiogram is an ultrasound of the heart. A stress echo is one where we will look at a heart at rest, but then we'll also put the heart under stress and observe how it responds to a known stressor. And that response to a known stimuli informs us at a deeper level about the health of the heart than at a surface. So what we do is we watch the brain, and if we're looking for a condition like a stroke, which is high amplitude, we know instantaneously. But if you want to know if somebody has a concussion, you sit there and you stimulate it with various stimuli, and you observe how it responds to that stimuli. So that's how we introduce a new vector on the data and the information stream that we get. Good question, though.
So we've got time for one more, and I've been ignoring this side. So does anybody have a question over here? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Volkan from Science 37. So I couldn't agree with you more with regards to using archaic endpoints for clinical trials. So, and as you know, one of the reasons this happens is because sponsors and FDA recognizes that old endpoints, stuff that's still being done on paper and pencil. Have you done any headways with sponsors, FDA, and what's your timeline? What do you think that this will be accepted by them so we can have a lot better endpoints and accurate endpoints for clinical trials?
So that is a fantastic question. The thing about doing partnerships and collaborations with drug companies specifically, and for all the drug reps and all the drug company people in the room, mad respect for the timelines you guys do, because it's like a 15-year timeline from inception of a program to clearance. So for us today, for a lot of these conditions, when we interface with drug companies, they're like, look, we're already in phase 1. Our phase 3 is designed. It was locked in 3 years ago. And so it's a really long-term project, especially domestically. We found a lot more success with international partners that are earlier on and are trying to leapfrog a lot of people who've put a lot more money in and have head starts. And they want to use us as a competitive differentiation. So we definitely, we can find places where there's opportunities for disruption, but I'll tell you that oftentimes when we go to the big boys in the drug space, they're like, kids, sit down, we know exactly what we're doing. We don't need your fancy AI schmai. We designed the best clinical trial that paper can buy, right? And you're like, all right, we'll see you after the headline comes out on the journal about another failed trial costing X billions of dollars. So yeah, it's definitely a long road to pave. And I admire everybody who has the patience to do drug discovery work because it's a long, long road.
We're out of time, but thank you so much, Leah.
Thanks, Tina.
It was great hearing about your stuff. And now our final CEO, Martha Lawrence from Ascendo Wave. Please come join me. You get walk-in music. So, Martha, thanks for joining us. Tell us about your company and yourself.
I'm happy to. So Ascendo Wave is a machine learning technology company that measures pain and helps manage pain. We do full spectrum brain analysis, and we correlate brain waves with your perception of pain, discomfort, or even nausea. We've created a nausea scale as well. My background, I'm a former HCA executive. I was with HCA for 18 years. For those of you that don't know, HCA, a large owner of hospital system across the country, they do between 5 and 6% of all the inpatient care in the country, and 1 in 50 nurses work for them. And they actually incubated our technology. So we spent 2 years with HCA, and they guided us on what they thought the technology should be at the end of the day. And I think that's really important for young companies, to make sure that you spend time with your customers and understand what the highest use case and value is of what you're doing. Because I would tell you that we would have gotten a lot of it, but we didn't get everything. And so that time spent for 2 years, and it was on doctors' heads and patients' heads and clinicians' heads, all of that was, I think, very valuable to making sure that we had a really nice product market fit when we released the technology, and it's been out for 4 years.
And just because I think your background is so interesting, because it's somewhat unique as a CEO of a med tech company, how valuable was that to you in being the CEO?
So hugely valuable. And I would tell you that a lot of these technologies that folks are trying to deploy in our hospitals are, in some cases, they're really very interesting and they have good use cases, but they really don't necessarily understand hospital systems and how to deploy well in a hospital system so that you have a really light touch and you become an enterprise solution, not 1 or 2 little toys that are on a shelf somewhere. So you're really making a difference within a hospital system. And I would tell you that it's really helpful to know the secret sauce. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily tell our vendors what it is, and then we're like, oh my gosh, they're so high maintenance. So, I think that was very helpful in terms of our success, and really why we have the largest real-time database on pain. We've had between 56 and 57,000 patients use the technology in the hospital. And I think we've got a little
Is now the time for the video?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I'll tee it up for you. So this is a video from an HCA hospital. The hospital is in Idaho. They're about 30 minutes outside of Boise. So this is a rural community that's using the technology. They had the technology for 6 or 8 months before they brought the media in to see it. And I like videos like this because, and it's probably just my bias, but I like to see what does the hospital think of your technology? What does the patient think about your technology? What does the doctor think about what you're doing? I think that's really very valuable to see, and it's a little bit hard for you potentially to picture a SendaWave because there's really nothing much like it in the market. So I thought it might be helpful for you as well to have a visual.
So if you guys could get that going.
Opioid alternative at West Valley Medical Center in Caldwell, and it comes in the form of a tablet that you hold. Tammy Tremblay is here to fill us in. Tammy?
Well, we've done several stories on the opioid crisis hitting our nation and our community, so this alternative is a welcomed one. The tablet comes with a headband for patients, and together they monitor and analyze patients' brain waves to help them feel more comfortable. It's a tool that not only benefits patients, but hospital staff.
Here at the top is an interactive pain scale.
This is the SendaWave. Kat Murgis describes it as active comfort management technology. She's a patient experience associate.
The technology is comprised of a tablet, a Samsung tablet, and a headband that monitors and analyzes the patient's brainwaves. And it selects content based off of that to kind of help the patient feel a little bit more comfortable and relaxed during their stay with us.
The main purpose is to curb the need for narcotics.
The less medication you can use for the patient's a good thing.
Brad Young used the SendaWave here right after his back surgery. He admits he wasn't so sure it would work.
I gotta say, I was a little bit skeptical. Somebody comes walking in with a headband and a tablet, and I'm an adopter of technology, but it was just something that I wasn't expecting.
He says it did end up helping. Brad's surgery was invasive, so he still needed some medication, but this took his mind away from the pain.
It was a way to distract me from what was going on in my body.
It's a great technology that is
opioid-free.
Director of Orthopedics and Spine at West Valley, Angie Davis, says another positive about this new technology is it helps the medical staff and that aids in the patient's care.
It can pick up that they're nauseated beforehand, and so that's a tool also for the patient as well as the anesthesiologist and nurse in that area.
The Ascendo Wave can be used on most patients. We're told kids especially like it.
This is videos, games, movies, and music.
And it recently rolled out, so more and more patients will have the opportunity to experience it.
I do appreciate the conservative approach, and with this tool, I think it was just an additional way to help kind of curb that reliance on the medication.
I think it's, this technology is such a revolutionary thing, and to be able to be a part of this cutting edge technology has been pretty extraordinary, and I'm very thankful for that.
And in Idaho, the Ascendo Wave is only available at West Valley Medical Center. It's free for patients, and so far the response has been very positive.
So, thank you. So there was a young woman that you saw in that video. She had a braid on, and she's actually one of our employees. And so I think it's helpful to mention that it's not only important to have really meaningful technology and a good value proposition, but you have to identify a way so that it's very seamless in the hospital. So we actually embed our own employees in the hospital to hand out the technology every day. We use pre-med college students, and they are very bright, and they love technology, and they're going to be all about digital health when they're in med school and beyond in their careers. And they are highly credentialed, so they go through background checks. They have, HIPAA classes. They do drug screens. They fill out a boatload of paperwork. They've got 7 to 10 hours of training before they're actually in the hospital handing out the technology. And that's really what's allowed us to have the end that we have, because we're not really relying on the clinical staff to hand out this technology. I mean, they can do it in the middle of the night or when things are kind of not very busy, but it's really making sure that you have a non-pharma pain treatment modality that's available consistently. And the Joint Commission actually required that of every hospital in the country in January of 2018. Because of the opioid crisis. So technology is much less expensive. This is a very easy way to get the technology out. We're not really sort of adding one more thing to our poor clinical staff who's up to here in terms of workflow. And yet we're making sure that we're responding to patients with something that they're really looking for. So in our hospitals, pain management on the whiteboard in the room that they're in, that's the number one thing that they want.
Right.
What's the most important to you? It'd be pain management. And so we're really providing them with something that they want. They're all very smart. They're reading about the opioid crisis, and they're very interested in having another alternative in the hospital. And it's a very cost-effective technology for the hospital as opposed to complementary therapists, which is really what the Joint Commission suggests, and unfortunately nobody went into massage therapy to work in the night shift. So it's a real problem for our hospitals. So this is a really nice solution.
I loved the guy who talked about how he was skeptical, but it really works. Is that the feedback that you're getting in general, and are people only able to access it in the hospital themselves?
Yeah, so if they haven't had any introduction to the technology before they enter the hospital, then yes, they're a little bit like, what are you talking about? So you have to, and our staff has the ability and the time to explain the technology to them. So that's not an issue, but they're typically engaged. Often there are classes for orthopedic patients, and they get that ahead of time. There's great interest in our technology. Our patients are actually trying to buy the technology from the hospital every day. Fabulous. And I would tell you, as a former hospital executive for 18 years, nobody was remotely interested in anything that we had. Because you usually don't go shopping at your local hospital for the newest and coolest stuff. And so that's been really important to us. So hospitals are our first channel. Our second channel is biotech and pharma. We have 3 confidentiality agreements with big pharma companies who are interested in our ability to measure pain for either consumer health, clinical trials, or the third area is value-based care, which I think is actually the most fascinating because we're measuring drugs and how well they're working in the hospital and have the ability to help differentiate drugs. Data, we have a confidentiality agreement with a data company, and we have a very unique set of data in that women are really underrepresented in the pain research and pain data. The NIH has a huge call to action around this, and we're in labor and delivery. And so we're measuring women who are in pain, and so we've got that data set. The fourth is device, and we have a new confidentiality agreement around there, so I think you'll see some work in partnership. And then we actually have a new area.
Oh, yeah?
That we're announcing, and that we're calling Ascendo Wave at Home. So because our patients have been trying to buy the technology from the hospital, it was always really on our roadmap, but we think the timing is right. We have a nice relationship with both Samsung and AT&T. Initially, we'll make this technology available in the 3 initial states, Idaho and Colorado and Utah, where we have hospitals for those patients who are coming home from the hospital, and then it'll grow from there. We're here in Los Angeles, and it'll probably be in Los Angeles within the next 6 to 9
And this is a
months.
scoop, right? This is where you're announcing it first.
That's
really cool. So I can ask you one more question, or we can go to the audience we don't have that much time left.
Do a question and then maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Okay, perfect. So we didn't actually ask you how you're using the AI in your technology.
Yeah, so what we're doing
AI, not
is
the AI.
we're correlating brainwaves with your perception of pain. We have an incredible amount of data on this now. So for our hospitals, what we're doing is we're providing data on the average level of pain, the maximum level of pain in the hospital, and then we are looking at what does the night shift look like compared to the day shift in terms of pain. So I would tell you, in our hospitals at least, we're drowning in data. We don't need more data. What we need is actionable data. And so what we've done with that particular customer group is just say, now that we can measure pain objectively, what do you want to know? And so people are having to really sort of think through what they want to know. And we're looking at what's the average level of pain by department. Do we have a department that's an outlier? And then all of this data flows into a joint commission report that they can just hand the JC and say, okay, we now meet the requirement. Here's what we're doing and measuring institutionally.
Fantastic. So we have time for one question, I think. In the back there.
I kind of missed the relationship between the pain level and the content. Is there one?
Yeah, there is. So we're doing really 3 things with the technology. We are measuring their level of pain. On the content side, we have some typical kinds of content that the patients can really self-select. So those might be games or music, super popular at night because not your bedroom at home, hard to sleep. And then we've got one other one. But the piece that's really sort of the machine learning driven around the content is our video clip section. So when you're in this section, your content starts changing based on your brain activity. Whatever's reducing your pain, you start seeing more of. So it's customized and individualized to you. And so everybody sees something different. So when I do Ascendo Wave, I see little golden retriever puppies running around. And this cute little cartoon out of the UK called Small Potatoes. And they're these little potatoes that have British accents and they sing and dance. And so all the content in that section is data libraried and linked by genre, by time frame. And then the algorithm's smart and it starts looking for more content that's just like that and it serves it up to you. And so patients are really intrigued with this technology. One, because we're all a little bit self-interested. We love seeing stuff on ourselves. So they love seeing their brain waves at the bottom of the screen. They love seeing the pain scale light up for them based on how they're feeling. And they love seeing their content change based on how they're reacting to it. So think of it as like brainwave controlled TV for pain in your lap when you're either at the hospital or you're at home. So great question. Thanks for helping us do the link a little bit deeper.
That's fantastic. We're out of time, but I loved hearing about it. I hope you all enjoyed it too.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Judy.
So just in closing, I wanted to say there you have it. 4 companies working in Los Angeles across the entire spectrum of healthcare, improving outpatient outcomes, lowering costs, using AI, and I think it speaks for itself. So thanks to all of you for your interest in this and your questions. Those were wonderful. Thank you.
All right, we got to give a hand to Dina for doing all this work for the County of Los Angeles. All right. Our next speaker, my pleasure to introduce, is Mr. Monarch Vyas. Monarch is a senior manager with Accenture's Applied Intelligence Strategy practice based out of San Francisco. He brings over 16 years of experience in the analytics domain and works with various clients to help define their analytics strategy, value targeting opportunities, hybrid architectures, and emerging technology use cases. See, he's who we need to help us sell these ideas, right? He's passionate about the human-centered approach to technology and leads the responsible AI practice for the West. Monarch is a thought leader in the digital arena and a public speaker on leading practices. Please welcome Monarch.
This has been phenomenal so far. I think all of you guys are doing such wonderful work. To be honest, when I was actually given this particular topic, I was thinking, how do I actually start this and not make this a gloomy subject, right? So let me start with this. $13 trillion. That is what the AI economy is estimated to be by 2030, which means in the next 11 years, we are actually going to jump from about $1 trillion industry, which is estimated today, to about 13 trillion, right? There is enough in there to be excited about. There's enough in there to be embracing this particular technology. But as I had guessed, and this is a thing that I heard, and I completely trust this more and more. I hear all of these phenomenal work that's happening. There is nothing artificial about artificial intelligence today, right? You heard every single case study until now which said people are creating artificial intelligence systems. They are being used for people, and they are being tested and trained by people, right? The word artificial intelligence is a bit of a misnomer. Everything is happening with the humans. And I think that is the key of what we want to focus on today. Very intentionally, when I had created this particular content, I had left a lot of health and life sciences examples out of it. The reason is that we want to embrace this technology. We want to be excited about it. And for the next 10 minutes, we are going to take comfort from the gloom of the others and learn from it. Right? Do I have a clicker that I can? Perfect. So I'm not going to drain the slide, but you get the concept. A lot of technology companies in the near past, very recently, have been branded racist, biased, sexist, and a lot of things that we don't necessarily want to get associated with. Some of you may have heard Tay. How many of you have heard Tay before? T-A-Y, right? Very few. Tay was essentially a Twitter chatterbot, which was launched by this technology company. Within 24 hours, that particular chatterbot went from hello world to being an anti-feminist, pro-Nazi chatterbot. They literally had to shut it down. And the reason it had happened was unexplainable, right? These mega technology companies had to shut these programs down because they were not able to explain this. And that's the risk that is associated with AI technologies. The loss of opportunities, the economic loss, the loss of liberty is very real. It's very, very real, right? Now, the few things that I want this particular group to think about, right, is let's think about the 90s, right? In the 90s, a lot of processes started outsourcing. Outsourcing was a big thing, right? A lot of the times when people thought about it, in retrospect, they say a lot of bad business processes were outsourced to get labor arbitrage rather than actually improving those processes. Is AI and intelligent automation the outsourcing of our world right now? Are we trying to outsource a lot of the existing bad processes into automation in trying to make it cheaper? That is the number one thing that I want you to think about when I say fixed versus growth mindset. We've already spoken about this, but AI systems are going to create more jobs than the ones that they're going to take away. How many companies are thinking about it is the critical factor of how we are going to take it and embrace it in the near future. All right? There are supposed to be trainers of AI systems. There are people who are going to have to explain AI systems, and then there are people who are going to have to sustain AI systems. Right? Are we thinking about the future workforce when we are creating AI systems? Or are we in a very fixed mindset of let's automate some menial jobs? Right? Let's think about that. It's a very critical component. Trust and transparency is going to be big. We are collecting data. I was talking to somebody and we discussed about there is consent and then there is informed consent. Right? Every time I join a social media company or a social media app on my phone, I always sign a 10 I never read pages of end user agreement, wherein I give my consent, but it is not informed consent. And that is the question I think somebody in the audience asked a previous panelist as well, which is, how do you take care of that data? The collection of the data, the use of the data, the trust and the transparency is extremely critical. Inclusion and diversity, avoiding AI mistakes, everything is pretty much should be as a part of the culture of the organizations, right? Do you guys know that there is now a beauty pageant that is judged by AI systems? Right? The first beauty pageant that happened, 60,000 applications, 44 of them made into the finalist, only one dark-skinned applicant made it through. Right? That is because inherently, as a societal bias, that particular machine was equating beauty to fairer skin. Right? Those are the kind of things that we want to avoid. And to a large extent, responsible AI needs to be ingrained in the principles of trust. It has to be trustworthy, it has to be reliable, and the one thing that I actually want to combine all of these together is accountability. We are all collecting data. We are all going to use data. At some point in time, we may monetize this data, share data with partners, with others. Are we accountable for that? Are we responsible for the use of the results that come out of our AI applications is going to be the key, right? Driving accountability is the key. Security. We already spoke about it. But then the other part of understandable and teachable is one thing that I want to very quickly cover, right? Which is the biggest fear with AI today is that AI is a very black box technology today. You put something into AI, you know at a very high level what it's going to do, but then you get the outcome. If I try to ask somebody, why did that particular system tell you that this is what, this is supposed to be this type of a tumor versus not? The AI system is not as explainable as the traditional systems. It's not a query. And a lot of effort has to go into that, right? Which is, can you make the system understandable? Can you make it teachable? The things that I want to think about, have the organizations think about is all of these, right? This is operational part of, and the technical part of how AI will actually flourish in your organizations. I think technology is something that we discussed again from one of the audience questions before for a panelist where we said, how are we securing data, the firewalls? I think there was a wonderful answer about how you make sure that you don't necessarily own any data. Are you thinking about it when you're setting up technologies, right? Organizationally, and this is one interesting thing that I want to question all of you, right? Which is, when you are thinking about an AI project in your companies, in your projects, the first question that we typically ask is, can we? Can we possibly imagine a world where we can use a technology or a robot to envision a face, right? The question that we need to also ask is, should we? How many of us currently ask, while we kickstart an AI project, should we? When we collect data, should we, right? Data is available everywhere today. AI systems and technologies are available everywhere today. The questions that we need to ask along with can we is should we, right? Reputational risks, major reputational risks coming through with it. We need to avoid it. Make sure that responsible AI is not an afterthought. It is something that you inculcate as a part of your initial analysis, right? A lot of the companies have failed in this particular space because they consider responsible AI is an afterthought once the headlines have been made. Isn't that something somebody just shared on the dais right now? Don't wait for that headline to happen. And that's the core message. There are a few ways to start. And these are not exhaustive by any means, but there are tactical ways of doing it. There are ways and means in which you can make sure that there is your data, your experiments, your models are devoid of bias and have fairness built into it. There are ways and means you can actually scientifically go about it, right? There are experimental biases, as we call it, which is essentially biases that are there in your data. It is there in your models. It is there in the way you designed it. And then there are societal biases. Experimental biases are easier to solve for. Societal biases are something that is ingrained in you. You don't even know that they exist. So it is the awareness part of this is extremely crucial. One of the other things that I want to bring about is the entire governance framework around this, right? And I think governance and compliance is something that everyone likes to use. But it is extremely important in this space as well, right? I mean, how much of a guardrail have you really put around your responsible AI? And the thing that I want to really end at this particular point on this particular slide is, I was at a particular conference like this one where somebody asked, why do cars have brakes? A lot of answers came through. Some said it is compliance. Some said it is for us to stop. Somebody said it allows us to go faster. If you did not have brakes in your cars, you would possibly not drive more than 5 miles an hour. The fact that you go 60, 70, 80 miles an hour is because you have brakes in your car, right? The one thing that I'd love for you guys to take from this particular section is consider responsible AI as the brakes for your AI projects. They are the ones that are going to allow you to be in control and go faster. It's not an impediment. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for a thought-provoking talk. I do have to warn you, I'm going to steal that break line. I'll give you attribution, though. That's a great line. Okay, we're in the home stretch, folks. So our keynote, we're at Google. We need to have a Google keynote speaker, right? So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Mr. Philip Nelson, who leads the translational research team at Google, applying machine learning and advanced computational techniques to science and healthcare challenges. He joined Google in 2008 after acquisition of a startup, and he had been previously responsible at Google for a range of apps and geoservices. He's Harvard trained and helped found and lead several Silicon Valley startups before joining Google. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm on so I can wander. Okay, great. Hello, everybody. It's always fun to be the last speaker. Thank you very much for inviting me. And that was really a fantastic talk. Thank you. You know, sort of looking at the breadth of some of these issues. I'm going to kind of go the other way. I'm going to go deeper. So I'm going to, I'm a practitioner at the end of the day. My team builds AI applications. So I'm going to, in this talk, clicker, here we go. What I'm going to try to do is take you through like what's inside the box, like what's new, why is suddenly AI such a big deal, like what happened recently, and then I'm going to do a very deep case study on a project that we have around applying AI to the retina, and then if time allows, I'll take you through some of the advanced techniques, and then throughout this talk, I'm not going to just talk about the promise. There's a lot of promise, but there's risks and there's peril too, and I'll try to touch on those. So. I really like this quote from Bill Gates, and he basically said that people tend to overestimate the change in 2 years and underestimate the change in 10. And I think this is just sort of a great picture. So on the left is when Pope Benedict was inaugurated in 2005, and 8 years later in Pope Francis. So that's a fairly dramatically different world we live in, and it gave rise to the gig economy, and my kids can't imagine how we ever lived without these cell phones. So and this happens again and again. In the 80s it was the PC, in the 90s it was the internet, in the 2000s it was mobile, and in sort of this decade it's AI or machine learning. And there is a lot of hype and there is a lot of sort of overhype. But I think 10 years from now we're going to be in a dramatically different world. Like the notion of that we put teenagers in 5,000-pound cars with explosive fuel in the back and say, figure it out, and 30,000 people a year die on the roads, that might be a thing of the past, in the not too distant future. So let me talk a little bit about what machine learning is. People talk about AI. AI is very broad. Machine learning is a very specific aspect. And essentially what the changes from the past, in the sort of the original days, coding was a matter of writing rules. And you wrote lots and lots and lots of rules. If you want to detect spam, you start looking for words and you list it on and on. And these rule-based systems, there's a lot of excitement about AI in the 80s and the 90s, and it kind of, then there was this AI winter. And what happens is these rule-based systems, they just fall over. They're too complicated. You can't write the rules start conflicting with each other, and it just doesn't work. Now, in contrast to that, there's the idea of can we, rather than teaching computers to be clever by writing rules, can we teach them how to learn how to be clever by looking at examples? And let me use sort of credit card fraud as a good example. So for credit card fraud, it's only detected about 3 months after the transaction. The person has to get the bill, they have to read the bill, they have to complain, they have to adjudicate. What you'd like to know is it fraud as soon as they swipe the card. So what you have is, you can imagine taking a credit card transaction and listing it as a bunch of features, the bank and how much money it was and what they were buying. And then you have a bunch of labels. This one was fraudulent, this was not fraudulent. And what you'd like to do is learn a formula on the features to predict whether or not it's going to be fraud. And so, it kind of worked, and we were making progress in machine learning. And this is sort of a stylized picture of it, but the idea is you would have some data, whether it was a credit card transaction or a voice sample or whatever, you would have to create these features that described it, and then you would do some math to do the learning at the other end. And year after year, there was new PhD theses given out. There was like specialty groups in each of these areas about optical character recognition and voice understanding and translation. And we were making progress, but it felt very non-biological. Like your brain doesn't seem to learn this way, with sort of very, very unique features in each area. And lots of great ideas came out of it, and we were making slow progress. But I love this picture. You can start writing features here, but you're not going to get very far. It's not going to be very accurate. But this is a real problem, and people do this pretty well, actually. So the idea of neural nets has been out there for a long time, I think in the 60s and 70s, and they frankly, they just didn't work very well. So when I was sort of coming up through MIT and Harvard, we tried, and it just didn't work very well. But a few professors stuck with it. And around 10 years ago, there was a really big series of breakthroughs. And the basic idea of a neural net, I promise no formulas, but the idea is very much modeled biologically. Imagine the pixels of an image come in the bottom, like the photosensors in your eye. And then behind that, you have some neurons that are connected to some of the photosensors, and they're looking at some of the photosensors, and they make a decision. And then there's weights, and then there's mathematical operations, and it's sort of stacked up layer by layer before it gets the optic nerve up to the brain. And there was a bunch of innovations that underlie this. Part of it was how the networks were wired together. Part of it was in the mathematics of how to train them. And a big part of it was just the scale. It turns out that they don't learn for a really long time, and then they start learning really well. And in the same way, Da Vinci knew how to fly, but it wasn't until the internal combustion engine was invented that we actually had the power to take the air. And I think it was just 2 or 3 years after the internal combustion engine was invented that we were flying. So it needed, very, very significant increase in performance, and those increases are happening day by day. So this is an interesting sort of visualization, and you know what? I'm going to come back to so just go backwards. So the two things, and these are two really important takeaways. What these neural networks do that old machine learning didn't is, number one, is that they learn the features from the data. So you can just give it raw data. You don't have to tell it, look for this, this disease has this. You just give it lots and lots of examples, and it learns what's interesting. And even in cases, and I'll show you this, where we think we knew what the features were, these machines are better at finding the features than we were. The other thing is that it can make very long kind of end-to-end predictions. So just as an example, I could mount a camera over a billiard table, and as soon as that cue starts moving, I can learn where all the balls are going to go. And now what I can't do, though, is tell you F equals ma. I can't tell you about the laws of friction, about the elasticity of bumpers, but I can tell you where the balls are going to go. So it's sort of able to make these sort of long-running predictions. But again, one of the challenges is we don't always know what it's doing. Now, the fact is, if you built a physics simulator, you wouldn't get it exactly right because the bumpers are differently elastic in every pot. So it would recognize that, but we wouldn't get the formulas out. So what you're seeing here is a visualization. So like that grid on the lower right, that black and white grid, what you're seeing there is after a network was trained, this network was trained to recognize faces, what input stimulus maximally lights up one of the nodes in this network. And you see it looks sort of like edges. And this is what we believe is happening in the eyes. And again, no engineer drew those lines. Those lines were sort of learned directly from the data. So essentially, we went from this world to this world, where here's the raw data, and again, this is for supervised learning, here's the prediction you want to make, and it does the whole thing for you kind of end to end. So two big things come out of this. One is that we're able to go back to sort of long-standing machine learning areas and do a lot better. But the other thing that's really exciting is now new things are approachable that was never approachable before. So for example, my team has a paper coming out where just listening to the voice of ALS patients, we can predict, it's called the FRS score, it's how the disease is regulated. Nobody would have known how to do that before, and we're able to just hear some training data, let's do it. So many problems now are just opening up to AI because it's so much easier to do. So this sort of AI, it isn't just making a prediction like, is it a cat or a dog? You can start doing generative models too, where you can make things. So this is kind of cute. There's actually an art exhibit about this. This is called Deep Dream. What you see on the right is we took the image on the left and said, change the pixels so that it better lights up some of the nodes kind of fairly low in the network. These are the texture nodes. And here's another example, like two beautiful landscapes. You see like the waterfall in the back on the right. And basically what it did is it said, the computer thinks it sees something, let's materialize that thing, let's sort of bring it forward. So that waterfall becomes a bird, and you get faces and mountains, and they called it Deep Dream, like this is what these networks are dreaming about. But then this happened. So when it thought it saw a hint of a barbell, it started materializing barbells in the image, and the barbells had arms attached. Okay, so this is not a mistake a human would make. Like, we have higher level reasoning, like we know there's metal and there's flash and they don't mix. But to the machine, it was just pixels. And we trained it on a lot of the barbells it was trained on had arms attached. And so, when it dreamed about but there's a warning here, which is, especially for practitioners, is you have to be very careful. It's very easy to anthropomorphize these systems. You think it's doing what your brain would be doing, and it's not. It's doing something different. Like, these are essentially gigantic correlation engines is what they're finding. And there's a great saying we use in our team is that correlation isn't causation, but correlation is highly correlated with causation. So we find correlations. These machines are amazing at finding them, but then people have to go in and kind of understand what's really going on. So let me take you through the case study of some work that we did with the retina, and this is pretty cool. We started this about 4 or 5 years ago. So the basics, this is around diabetes. So around 10% of the world will get diabetes. A lot more people, it's a growing problem in the developing world especially, and a lot of people don't even know they have it. About a third of diabetics will get a pathology called retinopathy, and that's basically where the blood vessels in your retina break down. And for about a third of them, they'll go blind from it if it's not treated. So 10%, a third, it's about a 1% prevalence disease, but it's the fastest growing cause of blindness. And the way, and if you look like, say, the image on the right, you see those orange spots, that's like where plasma leaked from a damaged blood vessel and dried. It's called an exudate. The dark spots are hemorrhages where the blood vessels actually broke and it bled. And this disease is measured on this 5-point scale. And the challenge is that it's only symptomatic when it's proliferative. And that's when the damage is done already. So since I started working in diabetes, I talked to cab drivers and Uber drivers, and a lot of their moms and dads have diabetes, and the careful ones, they take a day off from work and they set up a doctor's appointment, which is a big pain, and then they go in and the expert has to do it. Why can't we just screen directly in the pharmacy? Why do they have to take a day off from work, and then they miss things? So the idea is, can we teach computers to at least do the screening, not to be the doctor, but just to look at the image and say, I think you need to see a doctor, purely screening. So we did this kind of a very Google way. I flew around the world and I gathered lots and lots of images, and we had to predict a lot of things. Another lesson here is we used off-the-shelf machine learning. Like, I had access to the best machine learning experts, and we didn't need to do anything fancy. We just used one of the standard models. It's called Inception. It's the one that wins the cats and dogs contest. And it was all in the data. We gathered lots and lots of data. I hired 50 plus ophthalmologists. We got about 1 million diagnoses on the image. And it worked fantastic, like absolutely spectacular. And we published this in JAMA. It was actually sort of a long negotiation to put in JAMA. We didn't want to just show that we could do it technically. We wanted to influence the practice of medicine. And JAMA is the journal really about the practice of medicine. So I started with 2 or 3 machine learning experts, and then we started hiring doctors, really amazing doctors. And we wanted sort of practical impact. So this was published in JAMA in the end of 2016. And this is a critical slide. If you take one thing away from this talk, it's this slide. So what you're seeing here is the columns are the best of the ophthalmologists we hired to give us diagnoses on the images. The rows are patient images that were selected because they were challenging. And the color is the diagnosis, okay? So the bottom 2 are clearly sick. The top one is probably healthy, though one doctor disagreed. And this rainbow of diagnoses, this is how medicine is practiced today. And I show this to rooms full of doctors, and they're like, well, yeah, this is hard to do, and we're human, and what do you expect? And I show this to rooms full of engineers, and I'm like, we have to do better, we have to do better. So, this is for the retina, and the thing about diabetic retinopathy, it's kind of a slow-moving disease. If you don't catch it this year, you'll catch it next year. Sort of the tragedy is that the numbers are even worse in pathology. So you see at the bottom the intragrader consistency. So what that means is we gave the same image to the same doctor like a week later, and it was only 2 and 3 that we would get the same grade. This is only a 5-point scale. So it was only 2 and 3 that we would get the same grade from the same person. So I showed this to one of the best cancer centers in the country, in the world, and they're like, we never get 65%, like we get 30% or something like that. And so, my jaw hit the floor, and it's like, well, it's not really that bad. Pathology grading is much more technical. There's way more grades than there are therapies. So in terms of therapy concordance, it's about 85%. So essentially what that means is that you have a 1 in 6 chance. If a single pathologist looks at your slide versus a panel of pathologists, there's a 1 in 6 chance that you're going to be treated differently. So the takeaway is get a second opinion on your pathology. It's really tragic. So in breast cancer, we're making progress in cancer because we're able to identify subtypes and treat the types as we can. So like in breast cancer, there's HER2 positive, ER positive, and PR positive, which are fairly treatable, and then there's triple negative, which is much more challenging. The current estimates are about 10% of women are being mistreated around HER2. So and because the way they tell it is the pathologist, they put a stain, an antibody stain to look for this protein, and they think about 10% of the cases are misread. So what that means is that the women are getting Herceptin, the miracle drug for HER2 breast cancer, and it's very expensive and it has side effects and it's not going to help them. But even more tragically, there's a bunch of women out there where there's this miracle drug on the shelf that costs billions of dollars to develop, decades of work, and she's not getting it. It will save her life, and she's not getting it because the pathology was misread. And this is very personal to me because my mother had HER2 positive breast cancer, and she got Herceptin, and she was totally in remission. And so, we have to do better. So now, I want to stress that the AI does not replace the doctors here. So we can see DR, but we can't see if there's, a worm crawling in your eye, or, again, this is actually a real thing. The AIs are very good for what we train them to do, but you still need a doctor to sort of look at the unknowns, the full scope of it. But these tools can be wonderful assistants for doctors, and that day can't come soon enough. So about 16 months later, when we first published it in JAMA, our AI was basically as good as a US board-certified ophthalmologist, which was great. If you go to India, where there aren't nearly enough doctors, or Thailand, that's amazing. 16 months later, we were as good as a panel of retinal specialists. And we did not change anything about the AI. It was purely in the data. So remember that rainbow chart I showed you? What we did at first is we got about 7 diagnoses per image and got sort of a consensus diagnosis. Then we were able to do a sensitivity analysis and say, did we really need 7, or could we have 6 or 5? So it turns out for the training data, we would have been fine with 3 or maybe even 2. But for the test data, 7 wasn't enough. And it's interesting. So basically, the way you train the systems is you train it on the training data, and then you test it on the test data. And why this is important is I can make a million different models. It's the performance against the test data that tells me what the best model is. So what we did is we were flying retinal specialists in, and they were arguing image by image by image. So the lesson to the curators is don't be worried about dirty training data. The machines can actually learn from dirty training data, but you need to exquisitely curate your test set. You need a really good reference. And why this matters is because I would love to set up retinal scanning in train stations in India and in Atlanta and in Los Angeles or in pharmacies. If we're 99% accurate, then, remember, this is only a 1% prevalence disease. If we're 99% accurate, every other case will be a false positive. So I want to screen, like right now we only screen diabetics. I want to screen everybody to even discover where people have diabetes. So as good as we are, it's still not good enough. And we do diabetic retinopathy, we do diabetic macular edema. I want to do all 100 eye diseases. If I get someone's butt in a chair and an image of their retina, I want to tell them, like, do you need to see a doctor, not just, oh, you have diabetes. So there's a lot more work to do. Again, this is super promising and very excited, but there's way more work to do. So then we said, so we have these images, we have the diagnosis, and then we said, okay, running out of time? Okay, I'll be quick. So then we said, what else can we see? And this was kind of, we knew the self-declared sex of the people, and we said, well, let's see if we can predict male or female. There's nothing in the literature that says male and female retinas should be different. We can tell with about 97% accuracy. And we've just now, it took us 2 or 3 years, we just now figured out what the difference is. It's in like the 3D structure of the macula. So this was amazing. So this is like, okay, now these machines can see things that people couldn't see before. We can tell age. We can tell blood pressure. We can tell, the Framingham score, basically your risk of a significant cardiovascular event, just from a picture of your eye. So it's really exciting. So again, this is, part of what AI is doing is automating what people do, but now we're going into this world of doing things that people didn't even know how to do before. So I'm not going to go through all the details on this. Let me show you one other sort of warning case. So we got a bunch of MRIs for, these were Alzheimer's MRIs. So now it's sort of a thing. Can we predict male or female? And what you're seeing is the operating curve there. It was 0.99999 accurate. So it's very easy to come to the conclusion that male and female brains are totally different. Like the machine can see it. So somebody on my team had the sense to say, well, what if we just cut the brain out and try to predict on just the square of the brain versus predicting on the whole head without the brain? And so the whole head without the brain is still 0.99. And if you look at just the brain, it's only about 0.80. So this is, again, another warning is, you can anthropomorphize. These machines will gladly lock in on confounding effects. And you're thinking about the male-female brain, and it's just looking at the shape of the chin, or the thickness of the skull, or the position of the nose. So you got to be extremely, extremely careful as a practitioner of this. So I'm out of time. I want to show you one cool thing. So again, it's not just prediction. So one of the things that you could do with machine learning is it's called image-to-image regression. So if you have pairs of highly correlated images, you can learn to predict one from the other. And it's interesting, like as a human, if I gave you this picture, you could kind of tell that one chair is in front of the other and the monitor is blocking the door. You couldn't tell the exact distance. And it's funny because a few years ago, if a person could do something, it didn't say anything. It meant the machine probably couldn't. And now it's like, if a person can do it and you have training data, Of course we can teach the machine to do it. So we took this technology and said, can we go into sort of biological images like pathology slides or bright field microscopy and learn to predict the stained images? And it works really well. These are like rat neurons in phase contrast. This is a stain of nuclei and whether the cell death, and like this is the prediction. So we're basically able to learn how to like read these images. So there's really, you know, I do a 70-minute version of this talk, which I will spare you, but let me just jump ahead to the end. So just a few observations. One is like there's a lot of great opportunities here in the research and the clinic. And again, data is a huge issue. Acquiring data, labeled it can be done. It's just hard and it needs to be done right. And again, there's a lot of ways to do it wrong though. So be careful of these confounding signals. And so as a final statement, so you know the retina work is really exciting. We actually are approved in the EU. We're screening now live in India and in Thailand. We've screened thousands and thousands of people and thousands more. It's really like very, very satisfying when we started this work. We're working on getting FDA approval. But I want to tell you sort of one story about what we did in Thailand. So there's a gentleman named Dr. Paysan who was a US-trained ophthalmologist. He's Thai. He went home. He worked with the government and the health minister. He's like, nobody should go blind from diabetic retinopathy. So he started building clinics 15 years ago. He was in the process of training hundreds of people to read these images. And it was a great sort of, partnership with the healthcare system. And then turns out his son got an internship at Google, found me, introduced me to his dad, and we were essentially able to go to Thailand and insert AI here. So Dr. Paysan had done all the heavy lifting of building the system, of building the clinics. And again, it's not just enough to tell people that they're going to go blind. You have to then set up the care to help them when you identify it. So all of this hard work had already been done, and we got extremely lucky that we could just go, okay, insert AI here. And the point here is that ML can be transformational, but it's got to really live in the world. It's got to live in the existing systems. And I think that's an ongoing challenge for some of the companies doing it. So thank you very much. I hope this is helpful. One or two questions. Sorry about going late.
No, it's okay. So this is like freaking amazing, honestly. So we have time for one or two questions from the audience. Anybody dying? And then will you be available afterwards?
I will.
Yeah,
I will.
Great. Anybody dying for? Yes.
Microphone? Or not?
They're streaming it, so my friends are watching.
Oh, brilliant. All right. Well, yes, well done. Good on you. So two questions. One, in India, are you familiar with Aravind, the eye clinic?
Yes, that's our partner.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes, we're working.
And so my question for you is, a lot of this seemed to go very predictably. What really surprised you in the work?
Well, so the diabetic retinopathy stuff, that rainbow chart surprised us, frankly. I thought it would be much better. The surprises are actually sort of going forward. Like we're in negotiation now with the FDA as to what to do. But just from this model, are we predicting whether you need to see a doctor or not? Are we predicting whether you need to see a doctor in 6 months or in a year? Are we predicting the pathologies where then a doctor can make the diagnosis, or are we predicting the diagnosis? These are four like distinct different projections which have different like intended use statements with the FDA, and you have to decide, you have to choose. So, and then you need to do different studies for different ones. So getting it from, oh yeah, I've got a really cool thing in my lab, to, okay, how do we touch patients? I am overwhelmed at how challenging each of the steps are to get all the way through. But then when you get through, it's sort of amazing. So I would say for people that's saying, oh, I've got this cool AI thing I couldn't do before, it's a long road to get into the clinic. And fund yourself for the startup people. Be funded properly and spend carefully.
So our last question in the back there.
Hi, so I just wanted to ask, where can we find the 70-minute talk?
There is actually a URL. If you search for, I gave it at MIT, and it was called the Center for Brain, Minds, and Machine. And look up my name in Google, and there's the 70-minute version of it. So,
thank you so much.
Great, thank
Fabulous.
you.
Fabulous. Okay. The only person who could top that is the supervisor. Come on back up, boss, and take us home.
Well, thank you very much, Philip. Let's give Philip a big round of applause. That was thought-provoking. Brad, we appreciate your emceeing and the like, and all of the speakers who you've heard today. Don't you agree they did an excellent job? Let's give them a big round of applause. Now the bad news is I'm going to give the 70-minute version right now. And as slow as I talk, we'll be here till midnight, but we do have dinner. That's the deal. Let me just say to you, we're glad that we're able to be here, and Bill Allen, the CEO of LAEDC, has joined us, and we are glad that he's here. He was early on with us when we launched LA County's Bioscience Initiative. The same is true for Dr. David Meyer from LA Biomed, then now the Lundquist Institute, and we're pleased that Richard Lundquist is here to join us. Give them all a big round of applause, won't you? Well, sincere appreciation to all who have joined us and participating in this. A special thanks to Google for their hospitality. We've learned quite a lot today, and my vocabulary is not without its own peculiar, extensive discourse, but the language that was used here today challenged me. Therefore, I'm going back to school for 70 more minutes. It's an incredibly exciting time, and these opportunities are obviously endless. And we have heard from what I think are those who are pioneering in these areas, and we just want to encourage them to forge ahead. The wider the frontiers, the more to come, and IA will be a key component of the future. I think that's obvious to all of us, but the question I think we need to ask in this new age of innovation has to be for counties and governmental entities in the range of regions, how do we make sure this future is more equitable, publicly responsive, and accountable to the communities broadly perceived? And I think you heard that theme coming through in each presentation. I'm heartened to learn that IA engineers and scientists are taking note of the public's concerns over privacy and protecting personal information. The County of Los Angeles spends tremendous effort in heightening the confidence and ensuring that these issues are taken seriously. If they are not, we have huge, huge problems. After all, we have thousands and thousands of patients in the County of Los Angeles for whom we care. Our health agency representatives were here. Dr. John Sharon was here on the mental health front. I have to hurry up through my 70 minutes because I have an appointment with him. Thank you very much. Just 50 minutes is all he'll give me. That went right over your head. Thank you very much. And so there must be a conscious effort, I believe, to ensure that AI is designed to avoid bias against any single group or community. It's an important consideration for us all. History is the greatest teacher, and I know you know that, from which we have learned our success as a community demands that government and the private sector work together to make sure that today is just the benchmark and tomorrow is a place of promise and possibility. A future where people don't just search for a better life or better outcomes, but they find them. And this is what we must work towards, and that begins right now. And before closing, I'd like to make an announcement about some good news. I'm pleased to announce that BioLA, partnering with Google Cloud for startups to build and scale emerging life science startups in Los Angeles by providing free access to cloud credits, support, training, and community. This new partnership will propel LA forward as a world-recognized life science hub. We're on a mission here. You're a part of it. Don't be scared. Get with the program. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the balance of the evening with us. That was a cue to swamp. Do I take questions? Not in this life. Thank you so much. After all, I'm a public official. I'm skilled at avoiding them. Just a shout out to the executive office who's here, Cecilia Savalas, and our commissioners from the Civilian Oversight Commission. A lot of people here. Meet them. Thank you.